wine. There's a delay. Probably about 8 cents. Something like that. There we go. Hopefully we'll start seeing the rest. Welcome everybody to our second last Friday this season. We've got the amazing John Metcalf Jr. with us. Allie got caught up with her work stuff, so our duo is a little changed up this week. We've got our lovely Carly, my wife, but also one of our core volunteers and on our board of directors as well. And I guess if you guys are interested in what Allie's got going on, they've got this at her Marshall Steam Museum, they've got a Halloween steam thing. And I believe there are rumors that she's dressing as a squirrel.
Oh, that's so Allie.
So appropriate.
Nice. She sent me a message. She was looking up how to do her makeup to look most like a squirrel.
You can Google anything these days, I suppose.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So for those of you that haven't joined us before, this pre-show is mostly for us to get our last minute tech issues out of the way. I mean, of course, we meet with the presenter beforehand, but just to make sure that, you know, after we go live, there are sometimes some hiccups. Those of you that were here for our first few, thank you for your patience. This is just a chance for us to also talk. You know, during Folklore Fridays, of course, we would be in front of a bonfire. We're really not thrilled about the current restrictions, but we're trying to make do. And we would have been serving you guys cocktails. So we take this time to make them for you, well, for you guys to see. Carly's been the one that cheerses me off screen. Because I just see my hand, normally a hand model. Yeah, but because I don't drink both myself. So I was debating making just pouring beer because, I mean, John, you know I make beer. And I've got a Vienna style lager. I don't lager because I'm not that patient. And I just have to for it. My wife will if I buy more beer. Yeah.
Lager requires holders to make sure the brewing process you can't just rely on your basement or not. I think that really restricts your process. It takes quite some time.
So I remember to try to. It's very good. Speed it up. But we're gonna a beer, which I'm just calling beer. These. I know. It's got that beer. It's your favorite flavor. And for me, I'm going to do a bourbon fizz. Nice. Using this home brew. We're going to get old school. What are you drinking, Don?
I have a pumpkin ale. I'm trying to keep it with the season. Not a local beer, though. My glass says drink local. It's not a local beer, but I feel like I'm not straying too far from home because it's Southern Tier, which is now affiliated with Victory.
Yeah.
Very close to us, and it's their pumpkin nitro. It's fantastic. So I have a little bit of that left.
Nice. I'm jealous.
All right. What your favorite pumpkin beer is, if you have one, or if you're completely against it, please do speak up and start a controversial.
That's definitely a love it or hate it style.
Hey, Joe.
I'm sure Joe has an opinion.
I wanted hearing it. It's kind of like, oh goodness, I apologize. My brain fog is really thick today. One of our friends in the homebrew group, he absolutely despises any fruited beer. He says it's an atrocity. And so he posted rather controversially the other day that he was emptying out his pantry for whatever reason, and he had a pumpkin ale in there, or a can of pumpkin puree. But he was adding it to the wort, so he didn't get the flavor through, or I don't know, the mash in.
Uh-oh, Joe has no comment.
No comment. That's a loaded one.
That's a no. That's a hard no.
My favorite is whole hog, I will say.
Yeah.
It is just always just top of the charts.
That's good. Yeah, it's a good beer.
I don't know that one. Where's whole hog from? Don't know.
No, I just been on the shop there earlier, and I never go. It's lovely spice, a little bit of creaminess.
I'm going to do the white seal.
Very good.
Yes.
I like the shipyard pumpkin is always a good one, and also the Dogfish Head pumpkin ale has always been a favorite too.
I like the spice. It's the one they're not spicing it to hide the beer.
Right.
That's fair.
That's right.
Whole hog is don't. Read up the story.
And the original, Buffalo Bill, the one that was out in California years ago. I mean, they were doing one in the late 80s. That was probably the first that I ever tried. And it was good for a lot of years. And then it was a contract brewed thing. They switched contract brewers and it went kind of downhill. I don't even know if it's still around. I'm guessing not. It's been a lot of years since I've seen it.
That's
Buffalo Bill, yeah.
My first pumpkin beer was Southern Tier's Pumpkin. I remember looking really hard for it, and we stumbled upon it in Wegmans in Downingtown or something like that. And then I got really excited about Blue Moon Pumpkin Ale because that was before I knew better. My tastes have evolved. My palate has evolved.
Your palate has evolved. There we go. Yeah.
Joe mentioned Schlafly. That's a good one. That's another one. Schlafly out of St. Louis, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't they do like Shoefly?
I think it's one of those things that, it's a love it or hate it. Clearly, I think it was played out a little bit a few years back when everyone was doing. They were, they start coming out with it in July, and it gets a little crazy. That's an interesting trend that has some history to it. The whole pumpkin thing, how it sort of started as a late September, October into fall to celebrate the season, the harvest, and then it's kind of creeped up to breweries, want to be the first to get out on the shelves, and they start getting out late June and early July. Bock beer was the same thing in the 1800s. It was kind of a trend to get the Bock beer out, around Easter, and then it started creeping, and they were releasing Bock beers at the end of January. It got to be outrageous, but it's the same kind of thing, and the feedback from people were it was the same deal. Bock beer too soon, January. No, it's a spring beer.
One of our friends mentioned that about I love this. I will drink this so hard, but like when you come in from mowing the lawn, just drinking it in the summer, it feels wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to go get our beers if you wanted to talk about our gift shop.
Yeah, absolutely. Do a little quick shout out to our gift shop. So our special items this week are the old-fashioned glasses and our coasters. So be looking out for those on the website. We've got see if we have a link up here. So those will be for $5. Until next Folklore Friday. So,
here's the link for that.
Link for the shop. So you can find those two items for $5, as well as all the other items we've put out so far for Folklore Fridays, including the shirts. We've got the beer koozies up there.
Oh, yeah.
Not containing beer right now, but that's all right. Beer koozies.
I've got it's a beverage koozie.
Beverage koozie. We've got the hoodies. We've got there's one more.
The thing I'm wearing.
I said the shirt. Yeah, I said the shirt.
The stainless steel tumblers.
Stainless steel tumblers. Those were a big hit. Those were a big hit.
Yep.
So we've also got some other things up in the gift shop now. Some children's games, old-fashioned kind of games to try out. So please give it a look.
We're kicking it old with a pandemic, so we might as well kick it all the way.
Absolutely. It is, I know it's a little soon, but I do have to say we're getting to the holidays. So those children's games, be nice and little stocking stuffers. Nice to have around.
We're probably going to have to mail a lot of presents this year. So
yeah, hey, got to get started on it early. So,
and if you live local, you get concierge service.
Absolutely. We hand delivered some stuff just the other day. It was very nice to see some of you in person again, since it's been quite some time. So,
Yeah.
miss you guys. Miss the faces.
Miss the faces. I miss the bonfire.
Yeah,
too.
give us a heart if you miss the faces. Being in person. Just give that heart on the live stream.
And Joe did mention Sam Kelly won a medal before starting Dogfish Head with his pumpkin.
Nice.
I do remember that.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Was he the one that this whole church from?
No, I'm blaming Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill out of Hayward, California.
I'm gonna try.
Yeah, he was an early progenitor of pumpkin, but you know that was a traditional style. They used pumpkins and gourds and whatever would ferment back in colonial times.
I mean,
So, what kind of beer you're making? Year's East? I like that. So which one are you making?
I feel lighter.
Oh, that's true. You can pop them. It's fine.
Everybody. All right. So we're going to do. Here's your secret. So it's just a estimate.
That's nice.
Joe, wait, this is really loud.
I'm taking notes.
Please do.
Up here.
All right. And then we got our painted steak. That's
Drink local. Drink local.
Drink. Absolutely.
We love this. It's delicious local. So go with them. They've got a lot of delicious. I believe they're about a couple of two. I look at their prices. Only one in.
So Joe says he's getting an echo.
Yeah, we're trying to turn down our that.
He said it may be an 80s flashback, so it might not be an echo after all.
I'm muted. Verbal.
That's all right.
You're new hire.
All right.
The pay's good.
So we've got lemon juice, honey.
I basically good these, but I'm adding.
Yeah. I don't think this can go wrong.
Depends on how many you have. Drink responsibly, folks.
Even if you're in your own home, drink responsibly. It's no good to fall down the stairs.
There's yours.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm going to try desperately not to drink it before you make yours.
Go ahead and try.
Sniff it, though.
John's already started, so it's me that's behind. You guys are just on time.
John, cheers. Cheers. All right. So what do you got? You've got lime juice.
I've got lime juice. So it's going to be an ounce of lime juice.
Okay. I like lime juice.
I have hand tremors right now. Guys, don't get COVID. 0 out of 10. Do not recommend.
For those who are new here, not contagious COVID, just the after effects long haul.
Still
It's
don't
delightful.
recommend. No, not at all.
Okay, lime juice, orange juice.
Yep.
All right. I see maple syrup on here.
2 ounces of orange juice. And then about a teaspoon of that.
About a teaspoon of this. All right, I can handle that. Maybe.
Yep.
There you go. Well, this.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it. I've got some Canadians watching here, John.
Ooh.
And then
This is fun stuff. This is a barrel aged maple syrup. This stuff is awesome.
yeah, my brother-in-law got that for me for Christmas like eons ago.
Yeah. Good stuff.
I mostly use it in drinks.
All right, so we've got a little whiskey. You might have lost me there, but you probably still have followers on
So I've got maple syrup, bourbon, orange juice, and lime juice.
It's all you, John. All right. That's a good combination. I like that.
I think you like putting this in your mouth.
I would certainly try it.
Well, then you can.
Ooh-wee.
Just gonna clean up my mess. One of our friends used to bartend, and he said that the worst thing about making drinks at home versus at the bar is he has to worry more about the mess afterwards. All right, and then this one calls for an orange twist.
Fancy.
I get to be fancy. Oh, you know what? I think this one actually said to
Rub
it.
It's a fun technique.
Yeah, it puts the oils on the. I've not put orange in my beer since I last had Blue Moon.
That's fair.
All right, well, cheers, guys.
Cheers, everybody.
Here, I've got a local glass too.
Raise a
We're all
glass.
local.
Raise a glass.
I can't hold this up
Cheers.
very long.
Drink local. All right.
I drink that again.
That's delightful. Here.
Saucies. Yeah,
That's probably
cheers, Joe.
cheers, Joe. A top whiskey drink that I would possibly drink.
Possibly.
That's high praise from me.
That's true. All right. Well, I want to show a little bit of love to John because he's my favorite beer historian. So he's got a website, DelawareBeerHistory.com. There you can see a lot of really neat beer history. He's always posting something new. He's always finding really interesting things. There is a Facebook group as well if you guys are interested. And not only like previous past history, but he'll post upcoming history. So there's, if there's new breweries opening up, like is it Rusted Nail? That's going to be right around the corner on Ruthar Drive.
Twisted Irons.
Twisted
Irons. Thank you.
There we go.
COVID. I knew the name of this because I'm so excited because it's within stumbling distance for me.
I know, it really is.
So John, you can come over.
Oh,
and
no.
not to all over.
Just stumble on up.
We can stumble up the hill and pass
roll right
out
back
here.
down. Roll right back down.
Yeah, that's true.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. And the other thing that John is really, really prominent in, and that's like a very exciting project, is Restore the King. And he's going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I wanted to just highlight beforehand because it's a really amazing project. And you guys just came across a milestone where you're able to do, I think, a 3D scan of the statue.
Yeah, we have a 3D scan and going to get a little sneak preview tonight.
Yay! I'm excited. Awesome. So this is a really, this is one of John's pet projects.
Passion project.
Passion, yeah. Yeah, you've been talking about this since I met you.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see this kind of come to fruition for you because I know that it's been a long ride. And then he's also going to be discussing the Krauch Memorial Project. And I believe that you were pairing with Wilmington Brew Works for this. Am I correct? With their Krauch project?
Right, yeah. And I'm going to talk just a tiny bit about that a little bit later. This is in honor of the father of lager beer in Delaware. And he's a rather significant figure that's buried in an unmarked grave. And we're trying to get raise money to get him a memorial marker and recognition as the father of lager beer in Delaware. And that's a big deal. And I'll explain why a little bit later.
Awesome. That's really great. It's like cemeteries have been our theme for the last little bit. And then the other thing that I really want to plug is Delaware Beer History's book. So John did write a book. You can purchase it from your local bookstore, Amazon. The link that I have here will take you to the Hockessin bookshelf where you can purchase it online, throwing some support to our local businesses because they certainly need our help right now. In fact, we're going to go there Christmas Eve as part of a new tradition that we're starting.
Yeah.
Nice. It's like an Icelandic tradition where you purchase a book and then you purchase a book for someone and then you spend that night reading the book and then talking about it and really just kind of getting back to
nice tradition.
Yeah.
So John's book. Awesome.
Yeah, John's book is there. I read it all in one sitting. John was nice enough to try to offer me one, but I had already purchased it, so that works. Because all the funds do go towards the Delaware Historical Society, so a really good cause, because John is pretty amazing, and he's not looking to profit off of this. He's just trying to spread the history of love, which is amazing.
I love that we've had so many awesome local folks this year who are really just amazingly passionate about history. You know, John, Tommy, Scott,
Willis.
And Willis, man, they were amazing. And I love that. I love that there's like local people who just dig down into it. And it's great. I'm looking forward to this tonight. Give us a heart if you've heard John speak before. Give us a thumbs up if you haven't.
Or just tell us in the comments. I mean, and we're not going to judge because everyone has to have a first time.
Yeah.
And you're in for a treat because John is an amazing speaker. You know, I think, I don't know if the first time I heard you speak, John, was at one of our events or if I happened upon something else.
I think we had him at Green Bank. Right when your book came out, I think.
That's when I first met him.
That's when we mentioned.
And I made sure I did my homework and read his book before we had him.
So next week, what are we doing for Folklore Friday?
We have Ray coming from the Forgotten History of the Red Clay Valley. And he's going to be talking about murder, mystery, mayhem. We're going to have some Halloween-themed cocktails. I'm really excited. I've been wanting to make a corpse reviver for ages just because the name sounds fun.
Cool. I'm excited.
Yeah. And then we'll be selling blankets next week. We're going to be doing fleecy blankets.
You revealed our last item.
I did.
They're blankets. It's
spoiler
awesome.
alert. I mean,
gorgeous, and they're fuzzy, and they're soft, and
they're so warm.
Yeah.
So those will be available. Let me get the price for you guys because I wasn't expecting to spiel that. Those are going to be $15 on sale, so I will be releasing them probably Wednesday, if not earlier. But, you know, watch out on Facebook for that. So I'm stoked. All of these items are handmade. They do directly try to help Green Bank through this really rough time because, you know, everybody's affected by the pandemic, and museums and historic sites are not We're not immune to that. So we're trying to. I keep saying this. We're historians and museum professionals that are not used to using tech. We're used to handling old things and giving you the in-person experience. So we're trying to change what our balook is a little bit and adapt to the current times. And make these so I know that they aren't as polished as maybe larger institutions have, but you're meeting the person that does it all. and you know, it's a huge learning curve.
Handmade, hand delivered locally.
So
We got you covered.
We do. We've got all the stuff. But I'm boring tonight.
No, you made a great cocktail. I am beer tail.
Beer tail.
Beer tails.
Yeah. But I don't know. That's what I've got.
Oh, I wanted to play the bubblegum beer game.
Oh, you did. You did.
Comment. So think of beer foods. I'll start. Beer battered fish. Give us your beer foods.
What do you think, John?
Bubblegum beer.
Pretzels. Soft pretzels.
Yes.
Beer food. Yeah. With a little bit of beer cheese. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Where did we eat lately that had like a southern? They had the southern tier flat tire or fat tire. They had their fat tire beer cheese. It was delicious.
Oh, fat tire beer cheese.
Yeah.
Victory does a cheese as well, and you can get it not only at the brewery, but they also have it at Jansen's Market. It's the Golden Monkey. They do a Golden Monkey, a cheese with golden. Oh, fantastic.
That's a delicious beer. We didn't realize the ABV when we went on a tour, so we ordered 2 of them. Yeah, that was bad. Oops. Thankfully, we were walking, so it wasn't like we were sitting down.
You know, Ulysses up in Upper Wilmington.
Yeah,
North Wilmington. Makes an excellent Yards gravy for on their poutine.
Oh yeah, they use the love
Canadian
stout.
favorite.
It's the best poutine I've ever had.
We might have curds in the fridge. I'm just saying.
The best you've had? Really?
Yes.
Sorry.
That's the best you've had?
Yeah. I mean, the second best is at Costco in Winnipeg, but I feel embarrassed saying that, but it's true. We would go to Costco just for the poutine. But at least at Ulysses, you can order a beer to go alongside it.
Yeah, there you go. Her 11th best is what I can make for her. So
to be fair, that's not using like fresh ingredients. When we make cheese ourselves, when we do the cheese curds,
that's true.
No donaires. No donaires.
No, that's an Eastern Canadian thing. I just learned about that from another one of our Philly friends who happened to marry a Canadian. You know, because that's the thing to do right now. Mm-hmm. Pretty popular. What else? We could talk about beer cheese. We've talked about pretzels, beer battered shrimp.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
Beer pub burger. We were doing a lot better at this when we were playing it, just the 2 of us.
Joe says German food, and I've got to agree with him there.
Yeah.
You name it.
Man, that Prost restaurant. Remember when I had the beer that was the size of my face?
Yeah. I don't know if anybody. Have you been there, John?
I've not, but I'm very familiar with it, where it is, and haven't been. But I deeply missed the Delaware Sangerbund Oktoberfest this year.
Yes.
Yeah.
We volunteered for that one year. Yeah. We ended up in the wrong tent.
That's all right. It was a beer tent. That's all that matters.
We work it every year.
Yeah.
Yep, we're members.
But I guess you guys don't want to hear me talk anymore. You're not here for me. You're here for John. So we're going to take a quick 30 seconds to get ourselves acclimated, and we'll be right back with John Metcalf Jr. and his Ninkasi's humble daughters. I always stumble on that word.
That's all right. I'm sure he'll pronounce it properly.
Well, yeah, he's better than I am. All right, we will see you later.
everyone. Shall I start, Stacy?
Have at it, John.
All right, let's do it. I'm John Metcalf, and tonight I am presenting Ninkasi's Humble Daughters, a brief history of women brewers worldwide and in Delaware. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'd like to express a huge thank you to Stacy and Carly for the invitation to speak with you tonight. And it's too bad we couldn't be around the campfire like we were last year, but given the circumstances, I'm happy to be with you at all this tonight. The program tonight is going to recognize the vital contributions made by women to the development and art of beer brewing, one of humankind's earliest and most important pursuits. We should acknowledge the protagonists of the program, Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, and her humble daughters, that is, women brewers. More on Ninkasi a little bit later. Before we get to the event, I'd like to talk a little bit about a project I'm involved with. That's Restore the King, the statue of King Gambrinus, that is, the icon of beer. And in Delaware, the original statue hung on the Diamond State Brewery for over 80 years, and from 1882 until it was taken down when the brewery was demolished in 1962. Long story short, I ended up with the statue in 2014. It was broken in many pieces. Go back here, you can see the 60 some odd pieces on the left is what the statue originally looked like, in full color up on the brewery, 2.5 stories up. So we are going to restore that statue as an icon of Delaware's brewing history, probably the most iconic figure in history, in Delaware brewing history. And we're going to donate it to the Delaware Historical Society for placement in the Delaware History Museum, where it can stand as a representation for the restoration of the brewing industry in Delaware. As you well know by now, that brewing is back, stronger than ever. We have more than 30 breweries in Delaware present, and still growing. We have a couple more probably opening later this year and into early 2021. And back at the turn of the 2 centuries ago, the 1900s, brewing was the 6th largest industry in the state of Delaware, and it employed more than 200 people and accounted for more than $2 million in revenue. So it was a very productive and valuable industry. And once again, Prohibition all but killed the industry. And once again, we're back almost at square one, where brewing is an important cultural and social part of Delaware. And so we see the kind of the restoration of the statue as a symbol for the restoration of brewing in Delaware. So where we're at with the project, we're set to raise $100,000 to restore it, put it back together, and get it over to the Delaware History Museum. At present, we've raised approximately 20% of that goal. We're approaching 25%, and we can always use your donation. So we are a nonprofit, so your donation counts for something. If you itemize on your taxes, by all means, feel free to use our donation. But you can donate by visiting restoretheking.com, learn more about the project, learn more about the statue and who King Gambrinus was in history. Where we are right now, so our statue is one of 5 existing. Ours is in pieces. The other 4 are around in museums in North America, 1 in Mexico, and 3 others in the U.S., mostly in the eastern U.S. And these were all statues that were cast from the very same mold. So we had one example that we could use, and we 3D laser scanned that statue. We are missing some pieces of our statue. And so we'll recreate those pieces that are missing from the 3D laser scan that we did. And the scan will help us assemble all of the parts, put it all back together as it originally looked, have it painted, and put back in Wilmington. Incidentally, the Delaware History Museum is 9 blocks from the very spot where the statue stood at 5th and Adams Street. The History Museum is coincidentally at 5th and Market Streets. So I want to show you a few images taken from the 3D laser scan that we did. We had a prototype, a 9-inch prototype. This is what it's going to look like when it's done, front and back view. So again, don't want to belabor the point, but you can go to restoretheking.com to learn more about our project. So on with the presentation. Before we touch on the main theme of women and brewing, I'd like to take a little look at the earliest origins of fermented beverages, the early cousins of what eventually would result in beer. Our first stop is ancient Turkey during the Neolithic period, around the year 9500 BC. Gobekli Tepe, portrayed in this painting here, is the site of the world's oldest known temple of worship, and maybe not coincidentally, the oldest known brewery. The archaeological site is located in the Fertile Crescent, where native wild variations of barley, rye, and wheat once grew. And these grains were the foundations of the earliest known beverages. In fact, it's postulated that the desire to procure raw ingredients to make beer and bread may have been one of the primary reasons once nomadic cultures settled and began farming. In some of the large vessels that were discovered at Gobekli Tepe, archaeologists found evidence of calcium oxalate, which is one of the primary elements in what's known today as beer stone. Beer stone is the residue that's created when fermentable grain is mixed with water and heated up. This may have been the earliest evidence of beer brewing, and since it occurred in a temple, it's assumed that beer and brewing had a connection to religious celebrations in these early ancient times. Also found on the site is this limestone bowl called Navali Kori, which features a primitive couple dancing with a turtle. In ancient cultures, the tortoise was a symbol of fertility, and no doubt the couple may have felt like they were dancing with turtles after having celebrated with some of the fermented barley drink. Now we advance a couple thousand years and travel across the other side of Asia to the Yellow River Valley in eastern China and Jiahu. It was at this location in Jiahu during the early Neolithic period that some of the earliest known farming took place, and it's believed to be the first area where rice was grown. This brick pictured here in Jiahu, found in Jiahu, features the earliest known portrayal of winemaking, though it wouldn't have likely been the grape wine that we're used to. Instead, it's believed this wine was more of a grog comprised of honey, rice, grapes, and fruit, likely from the native hawthorn tree. The area was also known was also home to some of civilization's earliest known clay vessels, which would have been convenient to hold and consume the fermented beverages that they were creating. Now we'll head back across Asia to the Middle East and ahead 3 millennia to the year 3500 BC in ancient Mesopotamia. It's here and then that we see the earliest evidence of fermented barley-based beverages, the ancient ancestors of what we today call beer. The Elba clay tablet, which is pictured here from Elba, Syria, and it was in the year 25, created in about the year 25 BC, is one of the earliest known written documents produced by man. It describes, what do you think? The process for brewing beer. In fact, beer is credited with helping originate not only the first non-pictorial system of writing, but if you can believe it, also math, commerce, and medicine. And much later in the 19th century in Europe and America, beer would play an important role in the advancement of industrial automation and even refrigeration. So who were the earliest brewers? As you might have guessed from the theme of tonight's program, women were the earliest known brewers. While men folk were out hunting and gathering, women were back minding the household, baking bread, and brewing beer. In fact, in these early cultures, baking bread and brewing beer were seen as similarly related tasks. In terms of sustenance, beer is simply liquid bread. The grain-based beer produced during this period was very murky and laden with husks of grain dead yeast, and other particulates. For that reason, this early beer was generally consumed with straws, which could naturally filter out the residue when it was drank. Carvings from the era, like this one pictured here, consistently show beer being consumed through these long straws, which are believed to have been invented by the ancient Sumerians. Here we see a family gathered around the beer jug, which signifies, yes, that everyone in these ancient cultures consumed these fermented beverages, men, women, and even children. Beer was a dietary staple because it was nutritious, it contained vital nutrients, it was safe, certainly more so than the bacteria-laden water, and it invigorated the spirit. It certainly made you feel good. The oldest known beer recipe comes from Ur, Iraq, a circa 1800 BC hymn to the ancient Sumerian goddess and the subject of tonight's presentation, Ninkasi. It was Ninkasi who was said to have gifted beer to humans to promote peace and well-being. The ritualistic hymn describes how to brew beer, and it was likely recited by earlier brewers to assure that they mastered the process. Also, on its face, the hymn pays due respect to the goddess Ninkasi. Women brewers were highly revered and were considered to have been made in Ninkasi's image. Women were said to be, in fact, priestesses of Ninkasi. As the daughters of Ninkasi, women maintained the primary role of brewers and purveyors of beer throughout the millennium, from ancient Egypt into Nordic and early European cultures. The brewing of ale remained largely a household function for women throughout the Middle Ages. In these early times, there was no means or need for mass production of beer, since large population centers hadn't yet been developed, and the ingredients needed couldn't be procured in large enough quantities to brew beer in mass quantities. In Britain, women brewers were known as brewsters or alewives. These enterprising women created a cottage industry, selling the extra ale that they brewed to the public to supplement family incomes. And you'll notice in this etching here of an alewife with a broom that was hanging over top her door, which signified that the beer was available for sale at her house. Trouble was on horizon for women brewers. Through the 1500s, demand for ale grew in English cities, just as monasteries were starting to be dissolved. It was during these times that monks in England and across Europe began selling beer, the extra beer that they brewed at their monasteries, to support their religious missions and their orders. The church naturally vilified and pushed aside and even marginalized the small women-run brewing operations to the advantage of the older and men-dominated order of brewers. Brewing at that point had become a more lucrative profession. Respected, revered, and even worshipped from millennia, a public campaign was waged against brewsters and alewives. Increasingly, brewsters were portrayed in public broadsides and artwork, such as this one here, as grotesque, reviled, and demonic creatures who served impure and even harmful products. You can think of it kind of as the fake news campaign of the day, but it was very effective. The example here of the thoroughly unattractive Eleanor Rumming, she was a notorious 16th century alewife from near Surrey, England. You'll take notice of her pointed hat, her hefty waistline, her stringy hair, her pointed chin, and her long warded nose. And she certainly wasn't alone. Increasingly, in continental Europe, discrimination against brewsters was occurring. It was no less overt and no less vicious, for sure. Men created brewers' guilds, which excluded women and restricted the availability of raw ingredients like hops and barley that were needed to make beer. Here we see another unflattering etching of a brewster. Her name is Mother Louise, and she was a famous or infamous, depending on your inclination, 17th century alewife from around Oxford, England. Again, you see the similar imagery, the tall hat, the long pointed nose, and the chin. And what do you think of when you think of the long pointed hat, the pointed nose with the warts and the pointed chin? Well, you think of witches. And of course, that imagery was taken to portray alewives and brewsters. The tall pointed hats, incidentally, were used by brewsters and alewives in marketplaces so that they could be easily identified and, of course, sell their ale. The broom was taken from the ale stake that used to hang over their doorways to signal that the beer was ready to be sold. And, of course, the cauldron, which is indistinguishable from a brew kettle, and the old trusty cat, which kept mice away from the malt supplies. Though women were all but squeezed out of commercial markets during the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, brewing continued to be a critical household function for many European women for centuries to come, particularly in those that were located in the countryside. By and large, much of the beer that was being consumed was still being brewed in homes by women. And now the story is going to become very Delaware-centric and very Delaware-focused as we move forward 100 years or so and across the Atlantic. 1638 marked the arrival of the first Europeans to the area, to settle in the area that would eventually become known as Delaware. The New Sweden colony was established by the Kingdom of Sweden when a few dozen Swedes, Finns, and Dutchmen were sent to the banks of the Delaware River. As soon as they arrived in what became Wilmington, the colonists immediately constructed a fort and a trading post known as Fort Christina and planted grain in the hopes that eventually they'd be able to grow the ingredients for baking and brewing. In the year 1640, Governor Peter Ritter summoned the first women to the fort so that they could wash, cook, and make beer for the men who were stationed there. Soon after, the first large brewing kettle arrived, and the first brewery was constructed at Fort Christina. And I'll mind you, this was a few years before the first church. So it tells you the importance of brewing and beer to these early Europeans who were settling. The Swedes had big plans for brewing, malting, and hop growing in the colony, but unfortunately, those plans wouldn't come to fruition. In the year 1655, only 17 years after their arrival, the Swedes would be supplanted by the Dutch as rulers of the Delaware Valley. Unlike the Swedes, back in their native land, the Dutch were expert brewers and made a thriving trade from beer. In fact, the production and importation of beer were among the Dutch's most profitable ventures during the late 16th and even well into the 17th centuries. During their decade-long reign in the Delaware Valley region, the Dutch operated as many as 3 breweries at the center of their New Netherland colony along the Delaware, which was comprised of Fort Cashmere and the adjoining village of New Amstel, which is pictured here, present-day Newcastle. Of course, the more substantial portion of the Dutch colony existed north from present-day New York City to Albany along the Hudson River Valley. Much like in their native land, the Dutch women in New Netherland were effectively locked out of the brewing business, except as support on the retail end as proprietors of taverns and ordinaries. As with the Swedes, Dutch rule over the Delaware region didn't last for long. In 1664, the English took control of all the Dutch holdings from the Connecticut River south to the Delaware River. As was the case back in Old Blighty, the English in the Delaware Valley and beyond established a network of taverns along trade routes and in villages. Taverns were generally a family business, and as was British custom, the responsibility for cooking and brewing often fell upon women. No large-scale commercial brewing enterprises were known to have existed in the Delaware colony through the 1730s. However, brewing was still actively taking place in homes and in taverns. The first production breweries in Delaware history came with the arrival of a wave of Quakers who settled in Wilmington, then a very small village, in the 1730s. A brewer from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and immigrant from the British Isles, Caleb Sheward, relocated to Wilmington in 1769 and opened what was then the second brewery and malt house at 2nd Street between Orange and Tatnall. Sheward's business survived the War of Independence, and he made a decent living supplying Philadelphia brewers with malt, which was in short supply in the city of Philadelphia during the war. In 1785, Caleb Sheward died, and his wife Hannah took over the business and operated it for the next 15 or so years. Hannah Sheward's believed to be one of the new nation's first female brewery owners, and was certainly, she was a first in Delaware history. It was a rather remarkable feat for the time. When Hannah died in 1803, the Sheward family brewery was passed on to her son, Caleb Jr., who was practically raised in the business. The Sheward brewery stayed in the family for another 40 years, at which time it was sold to a distillery, and eventually in the 1840s, it was demolished. Zooming ahead a decade or so after the Sheward brewery's demise, we enter the age of the Industrial Revolution and lager beer. That was a beverage that would result in the development of brewing into a bona fide industry in America. For those who aren't aware, lager is the beer variation originating in Northern Europe that was popularized in what's now Germany and the Czech Republic. The lager yeast strain ferments at a much cooler temperature than ale, and for that reason, lager yeast is temperature adverse and really doesn't travel well. This yeast variation produces a cleaner, crisper, thirst-quenching beverage, more so than the traditional and often murky ales that were being consumed in the colonies of America. As it turned out, lager was perfectly suited for the warmer American climate and the thirsty immigrant population who was arriving on the shores of America by the thousands by the 1840s and 1850s. But how did lager and the delicate lager yeast arrive in America in the year 1840? The sign shown here is actually located in the Northern Liberty section of Philadelphia, and it denotes the introduction of the first lager yeast and lager beer to America in 1840. It was brought by Bavarian native John Wagner. The advent of the clipper ship in the 1830s made it possible for Wagner to quickly cross the Atlantic with his lager yeast. And once he arrived in Philly, not only did he brew beer, but he also began sharing his yeast with other brewers. And some of that yeast was even stolen. There's an interesting court case where someone was prosecuted for stealing some of Wagner's yeast. Soon, lager took hold across the young country from Philly out to Buffalo and Cincinnati and Chicago and St. Louis and Milwaukee, all cities with great lager beer brewing histories. But would you know, 10 years after it arrived in Philadelphia, lager beer was introduced to Delaware and specifically to Wilmington by saloon owner and brewer Christian Krauch. Krauch came from Bavaria to Philadelphia in the year 1828, which you might note was before John Wagner arrived, 12 years before Wagner. And he was brewing beer in Philadelphia, likely ale. Somehow, some way, Krauch procured some of the lager yeast and made his way down to Wilmington in 1850. He opened a saloon along King Street where he began brewing beer in a small way in the back of his saloon for his patrons. Though he never made a fortune as a brewer, in fact, to the contrary, Krauch is recognized as Delaware's father of lager beer, and indeed was one of the first lager beer brewers in the country, several years before household names like Busch and Miller started their breweries out in the Midwest. Unfortunately, Krauch died penniless, but he inspired the next generation of Wilmington brewers to pick up the mantle and advance what he started. And coincidentally, tomorrow will be the 150th anniversary of the death of Christian Krauch, who was buried rather unceremoniously in an unmarked grave in the Wilmington and Brandywine Cemetery. If you go over to Wilmington Brew Works, be sure to order one of their flagship beers, Krauch's Creation. It's named for Christian Krauch, Wilmington's father of lager beer. And as was mentioned in the pre-show, I'm working with Brew Works to put together a funds to raise to get a memorial marker at the Wilmington and Brandywine Cemetery for Christian Krauch to designate him and his wife and honor them as the father and mother of lager beer in Delaware. So the most substantial and one of the longest running breweries in Delaware history, and in fact where King Gambrinus originated, was the Diamond State Brewery at 5th and Adams Streets in Wilmington. This legendary brewery was founded in 1872 by Joseph Stokel, but in actuality, there was a lager beer brewery, Delaware's first large lager production facility, that was established on this site in the year 1859. Joseph and his wife, Johanna Stokel, entered the saloon business in 1850 after arriving in Wilmington from Bavaria. In the year 1872, Joseph began building his local brewing empire by taking over the Diamond State Brewery, while Johanna took charge of the family saloon. Joseph grew the brewery such that the name Stokel would eventually become synonymous with beer and would remain that way over the course of the next 80 years in Delaware. When Joseph died prematurely in the year 1893, Johanna succeeded him as the company's president, and she proved to be a very capable leader. Along with her son Harry as the general manager, they were responsible for a period of large growth at the Joseph Stokel Brewing Company. When Johanna died in 1903, Harry took over leadership of the Diamond State Brewery and continued to expand the business. The brewing company was dissolved during Prohibition with the death of Harry in 1925. 9 blocks west of Stokel's Diamond State Brewery was another one of Wilmington's breweries, a friendly rival, in fact, the Bavarian Brewery. Was known that for much of its existence. The Bavarian Brewery existed on this plot at 5th and DuPont Streets since 1880. In 1898, the brewery was purchased by a group of investors headed by German brewmaster Karl Eisenmenger. The new brewing company took its name from the existing brewery and became known as the Bavarian Brewing Company. Eisenmenger greatly improved the brewery and increased sales during his tenure, which sadly was all too short. Poor health forced Karl's retirement in 1908, and his wife Magdelane took over as president of the Bavarian Brewing Company. As it turned out, though, her term would also be short-lived, as she retired just 3 years after becoming the president of the company, but in doing so ran it very capably for those 3 years. Maggie turned over the reins to her son Karl, who operated the brewery into the Prohibition era and for a short time just after repeal, when the brewery was eventually sold. Now, one of Wilmington's smallest breweries was run by the Schaefer family. They're not related at all to the large brewing concern out of New York City. In the year 1883, John G. Schaefer opened a brewery and bottling plant at 17th and Union Streets in the Highlands and began brewing a Berliner Weiss style beer. None of Wilmington's large breweries produced this style of beer, so Schaefer had a veritable corner on the market in Wilmington. Unfortunately, and here's a familiar story, John died in 1891 and his wife Mary took over as president of the company. I think the suggestion that you're seeing with the wives taking over the breweries is that it was very difficult for the women during this era to start breweries on their own. In fact, it was impossible. However, they were very much involved in the business end in getting it started. And of course, their finances were shared with their husbands. And oftentimes when the spouses died, the wife was ready in the wings to take over. And it's no different for any of these breweries that were in Wilmington. If you're interested in this subject, by the way, I'd recommend a book called The Brewer's Big Horses. It tells this story perfectly of the Victorian era and a husband who died and left the brewery to his wife to run during some very difficult times. And Mary Schaefer faced similarly difficult times. She had help running her small brewery with her son, Gus, who was a bottler, and her daughter, Lizzie. When Gus died, Mary and Lizzie took over not only the bottling plant, but also the brewery. Mary eventually retired in 1908 and sold the business after she ran it for 17 years, which incidentally was much longer than her husband ran. The Weiss Beer Brewery produced Weiss beer on that location under new ownership for several years, but it eventually closed in the year 1911, and the brewing works were purchased by another brewer and moved across town. Outside of Wilmington, and this is really an oddity, almost all of the breweries that were happening from the 1800s through really the 1900s were taking place in Wilmington, because that's where the center of the population was in the state of Delaware. But outside of Wilmington, here's this little oddity over in the village of Wooddale. And this gentleman, Henry Biederman, opened a very small brewery, a very unique brewery, in the year 1881. It was on the train line, the Wilmington and Western train line. And folks from the city could come out to this brewery on the weekend, on Sunday, when the blue laws were enforced in the city of Wilmington. They could come out there and enjoy the lager beer that was being produced at the Spring Hill Brewery. Biederman named his brewery after a nearby landmark, which was located just behind his property. The Spring Hill Brewery is situated just north of what is now Hoops Reservoir along Barley Mill Road, north and west of Hoops Reservoir. Spring Hill's annual capacity at the time in the 1880s was less than 500 barrels a year. It was very small, and their production output really only served the local area, chiefly Wooddale, Milltown, Centerville, and Hockessin. Henry's wife, Mary, became involved in the business from its earliest days, and in fact was a brewer at the brewery. Here's Mary and Henry outside the brewery in front of what appears to be a tiny rudimentary brew kettle. Mary Biederman's death certificate in 1888 lists her occupation as brewer, and that really indicates that she played a very active role in the Spring Hill Brewery. After she passed, Henry wasn't really a brewer, so the brewery was turned over to their two sons, George, and later on, after George passed, son Fred. And he kept running the Spring Hill Brewery until it burned to the ground in 1911. So I'd be remiss if we were talking about brewing, but I'd be remiss if I didn't discuss women's role on the other side of the equation. As women were the primary movers of the 19th century temperance and 20th century prohibition movements. But alcoholism was indeed a growing problem and had been since the founding of the United States. By the early 19th century, overindulgence increasingly was tearing at the country's social fabric and was destroying families. Men's paychecks too often were being spent at the saloon to the disadvantage of families, and women were left as the sole protectorates of the family. The voices of temperance and moderation throughout the 19th century turned to outright prohibition after 1900. The movement was pushed along by women who were asserting themselves socially and politically as they were lobbying to gain a greater voice in American society, along with the right to vote. And of course, the political tension eventually culminated with the implementation of national prohibition in 1919. And you can insert your booze here if you wish at home. You know, the old adage goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that was certainly never more truer than with the passage of the 18th Amendment. Prohibition, which was once viewed by advocates as a means of social and spiritual salvation, pretty much right away proved to be nothing more than an abject failure. The population largely didn't agree with or abide by the dry regulations that were being imposed on them, and prohibition really didn't stop drinking, it just pushed it underground. In the process, it destroyed brewing families, which had survived for decades, and it led to the rise of organized crime, who were replacing them. The movement to repeal the 18th Amendment had many women supporters, many of whom were only 13 years before on the side of the dry movement. In fact, repeal couldn't have happened without the support of women, and activists like Delawarean Jeanette Ekman, who's pictured here with Pierre S. DuPont. Ekman served as the executive secretary for the Women's National Organization of Prohibition Reform, and like P.S. DuPont, was a key leader in the national repeal movement. So we move to beyond 1933 and the post-repeal movement. And at that point, two of Wilmington's large breweries somehow managed to survive the dry years. The Diamond State Brewery and the Bavarian Brewery, which I mentioned earlier, became retooled, and they were once again reopened as legitimate breweries once repeal came. With social mores loosened during Prohibition, breweries in the post-repeal era began marketing their products to, other than the 50% plus of the population, women. The sales appeal was made to women as product consumers, as this ad here from the Diamond State Brewery portrays. And also to those who made the buying decisions for the family, as with this ad from the Kruger Brewery, who was operating at the old Bavarian brewery shows. But as the post-World War II years turned into the 1950s, these small local breweries like Diamond State and Kruger were gobbled up or put out of business by larger, better-funded regional and national brands. By 1954, Delaware's last two breweries closed. They were victims of aggressive industry consolidation, changes in distribution, and declining sales. During the next 30 years, the brewing industry became dominated by a handful of national brands, all producing the similar flavorless Pilsners and their low-calorie variations. In the latter half of the 20th century, the brewing industry seemed to get more conservative, and no large-scale attempt was made to attract women, either as consumers or leaders in the industry. But all of that changed, thankfully, with the popularity of craft beer, particularly as we got into the new millennium. Today, women in Delaware are not only targeted consumers, but they also own, operate, and are key cogs in the state's burgeoning craft beer scene. Here we see Terry Sorrentino, our good friend over at Liquid Alchemy in Wilmington. If you haven't been, it's a fantastic local mead and cidery company over in Wilmington, just outside of Ellesmere off of Maryland Avenue on Brookside Drive. And there are other women who are involved in the industry, from the marketing end to the retail end to distribution end, and as brewers and owners. And fortunately, that's an increasing number that we're seeing that are involved in the craft beverage industry as owners in production, sales, marketing, retail, and distribution. To be sure, Delaware's craft beverage industry still has a ways to go to be a bona fide, equal and inclusive industry, but women have made a huge advances in the last 20 years or so, and they continue to impact the industry in very necessary ways, driving tastes and trends. So as you can see throughout the presentation, the Daughters of Ninkasi are active in the First State and beyond. And as is often the case with history, and particularly brewing history, it seems that everything that's old is once again new. So with that, I'll wrap it up with a word of thanks to those who made it through the presentation, and of course, our hosts at Greenbank Mills. And with that, cheers, everyone, and thank you for joining in.
Thanks, John. And cheers.
Cheers.
We need to turn this down because we're going to get the echo. We turned it up to the presentation.
Awesome.
So does anyone have any questions for John at all? We're going to throw up the link to his book because I can't recommend it enough. It's this one. Yeah. John, what's your favorite part about Delaware brewing history? Or can you define it that narrowly?
Yeah, I think I can. So I would say that in its entirety, it closely follows brewing history. So it's a microcosm of the larger scale picture of what happened and has happened and continues to happen throughout the United States. One thing I think people don't realize and understand is, while our brewing history is fairly narrow, really there are very few other places that have the breadth of history that Delaware has. We're among the first places to have brewing. We're among one of the first places to have lager beer. So it's a pretty proud and long history. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. Like one of my favorite things about beer, especially, and just like alcohol in general, is that it has a story. Like everything that you're drinking, it has a story. And beer, especially, it's a story of its history because those recipes came from somewhere. And how people were able to formulate those recipes. Like Germany has their specific styles. Belgium has their specific styles. America, though new to the, relatively new to the beer scene, we have our styles. Canadian beer has its styles. And I really think that that's, it also tells a story about the community that created these beers. And I'm sorry, I've got dogs that are playing with glasses. This is the problem with having Crystal at dog level. But I think that that's one of the amazing things, is that each glass tells a story, and that's what makes history interesting too, is that this is something that will connect people. Like I've got a Vienna lager here. I made a s'mores porter for two of my friends, or like, well, my friends and my wife. But
Too.
you are. I married my best friend. Which remind me, John, I need to, when I want to bring you a few growlers of the beers that I'm drinking.
Very good.
So we have a question from Joe. He said, great presentations. As brewing yeast was not isolated specific or scientifically identified until the mid 1800s or so, how did the early North American brewers continue the brewing? Was it beer samples from the old world, or did they use local airborne yeast?
The earliest brewers were likely using airborne yeast. They were trying to scrounge whatever they could get. We're talking about the early settlements, particularly the Swedes. The Dutch may have been a little different because they did have access to beer and breweries that were the Dutch. I'm talking about the Dutch now in that had settled along the Delaware. They had access to yeast from breweries that would have been producing beer up in New York. The English, a similar situation. The yeast would have made it across the Atlantic in samples, and it was primarily ale. Through the 1840s. Really, the 1850s is really when lager picked up here, and you can trend lagers advance with the advancement of refrigeration, artificial refrigeration, whether it's ammonia refrigeration or using ice. Brewing lager beer was very much a seasonal practice, and can only be done during certain times of the year given the temperatures. And underground caves that were blasted out by the larger breweries helped preserve and condition the beer during the colder months. But yeah, so it was a combination of wild yeast. There wasn't really the quality control, and Louis Pasteur didn't really discover what yeast was exactly until the 1870s. So there's a lot of prehistory there. Prior to that, they understood process, but not science. And so they knew if they did this, this, and this, it would result in this. Quality wasn't really a thing that could easily be controlled. It was really process driven up until brewing science became a thing in the 1860s and the 1870s. I hope that answers the question. It was a combination of procuring yeast from other beers in other places, talking specifically about Delaware, and or wild yeast.
Yeah,
I think that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. So I'm wondering, because I think we've all heard in the last 6 months, this fun year that it is, that so many people who have been at home have finally been trying out their sourdough breads, just creating the bread from the yeast in the air. Is that something you can do with beer?
Yeah.
Absolutely. The Belgians made a living out of it.
I mean, the first, like saisons, those were primarily wild yeast. They would have like the vat on the top of the the farmhouse, and that they would gather the yeasts during like the harvest time, and then they would brew the beer. Like that would ferment the beer. That's that's beer terroir as well.
Oh wow!
Some of the farmhouse breweries in Belgium leave their windows open.
Wow!
Come on in, yeast. Something you wouldn't think of in in a quality controlled lager, closed down, shut down, locked down lager yeast or lager beer brewery, or even an American brewery. But the farmhouse, some of the smaller farmhouse breweries in Belgium, they welcome it in. Come on in.
We had sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and right now, nobody wants to share air. Nobody wants their air, being moved around and shared with others. So it's kind of fascinating that we do collect that from, just out here.
It's interesting. It's like some people will bring in certain fruits and stuff like that haven't been cleaned off to try to introduce that yeast to their whatever they're making, whether it's beer or it's bread or whatnot. Yeah. Nikki she's commenting that she loves that women were the backbone of brewing, and I agree. Actually, remember when I worked at a beer or wine store, that we had this new hire, and she was talking to me about what my passions were, like, what's your specific knowledge? Because at the time I was the beer expert. I put quotations on that because there are so many people smarter than me with beer stuff. When I told her beer, she gave me like this weird look, and she's like, well, isn't that a man's drink? And it was all I could do not to go history on her. Because like, no, women were the brewers, and it got, shifted. This was a woman's thing.
Yeah.
And
I love the connection to the image of witches in history.
Yeah.
That's really, really fascinating to me. I never realized that there was that connection. So that's like amazing, like mind blowing to me to like finally connect that dot of where did that image come from.
I'm a witch because I brew the beers. I make delicious things. I take ingredients and then it becomes magic.
Yeah, I like it.
Joe he says open fermentation is so crazy. My grandparents made hard cider in an open barrel in their basement. That's cool. They must have had a good basement because I tried that in our old house and it was gross. I had to dump it out.
I guess it depends what kind of bugs you've got floating around in your.
We did not have bugs. We had musty bugs. John, do you like cider?
I do. I'm a new convert to cider, so my earliest experiences with cider weren't pleasant. Same with mead. Tried it in the 80s and really hated it. But I think it was because I wasn't getting good fresh stuff. Everything was coming from the UK, and it wasn't terrific. It was in clear bottles, so who knows what the process was, how long it had been sitting on the shelf, and how it had been handled up until then. But with all the craft stuff that's coming out, just phenomenal. Yeah. They do a great job at Liquid Alchemy, and gosh, I'm going to probably lease some out here. Wilmington Brew Works does great stuff.
Rebel Seed from Harvest.
Rebel Seed, yes, absolutely.
That is what converted me, because I was used to like the more mass-produced stuff, and that has its place. Because I know a lot of friends that really enjoy that, and I will use it when I'm making like a beer, cider sangria or something like that. But Rebel Seed from Harvest Ridge is amazing, and they were actually going to pour it our shearing day before all this happened.
Local?
They're local. Yeah, they're down in
nice.
Slower Lower, and then they've got a tap room up in just over the line in Pennsylvania. The spot escapes me at the moment, but they're really delicious. And meaderies, like the same thing. Like Liquid Alchemy is doing really great stuff and pushing the envelope with flavors, and they've got their glog out. And I remember Terry being really excited when that recipe came out. She's like, "Stacey, you need to try this. It's so good." And I can just imagine that warm on like a night in front of the fire. Like that would be amazing.
And that's a connection going back to those two. Jeff and Terry are very history oriented, and they understood the connection with the Swedes who settled and Delaware. And so that's, I think, the origin of the glögg comes from the Delaware Swedish heritage. And the first beer that is written about, a specific beer that was written about that I could find reference to, was the year 1654, and it was a beer that was brewed for Christmas, likely some sort of spiced beer for a Christmas celebration at Fort Christina. So,
nice. I've been trying to figure out what I was going to brew for Christmas,
and likely brewed by a woman brewer.
Of course.
I mean,
of course.
we're good with flavors.
Yeah. We're good at taking care of people.
We are. We especially like hospitality and all that stuff.
Well, I thought, that the theme of the parallel theme, almost the undercurrent of women and how they really drove the industry in Delaware from the earliest times was just absolutely fascinating. And interestingly enough, the time I found that women were least connected to the brewing industry in Delaware was the repeal era, after 1933. You would kind of think that wouldn't be the case. They were targeted more as consumers, but they really weren't involved in the industry itself. Whereas prior to that time, they absolutely were, which, it doesn't seem to flow, but.
Is it maybe, I mean, I know that women were pretty prominent in the Prohibition movement. Is it maybe that women felt connected to that and felt like they then couldn't get back into that game because their gender had been, I don't know.
I would say they weren't it's like senior gender all doing this thing where I don't know. I see some of our gender saying, hey, beer is a man's drink. And it depends on it's that psychology thing of, well, all of these people are saying this thing and I don't want to go against the grain. Maybe
Well, women were being targeted in that post-war, really, it was post-World War II era. They were being targeted as consumers, So beers, there was something called light beer, not the light beer that we know now. It was a lighter bodied beer that the Diamond State Brewery was pushing. Diamond State, incidentally, this is interesting, brewed a beer, a wheat beer, which was completely unique in the States at the time. So a Hefeweizen with raspberry. They called it Pink Lady. It was for draft only. It was never advertised. It was pushed out to a couple of taverns that women patronized, and they were kind of testing the market to see if this thing went over. It didn't, and they never really mass-produced it. But it's interesting. These things were being tested in the late 40s, early 50s, but women really weren't. While they were being marketed to, they weren't involved in the industry. They weren't involved as owners. They weren't involved in anything other than office help or roles like that. And it's kind of interesting that it really took the craft movement, and really not even the first half of the craft movement, into the craft movement a bit for the roles to kind of evolve and change a little bit, and to be a more inclusive industry. So that's really fascinating. Now, with the Pink Boot Society, we see things moving forward, really moving back to where they should be, and kind of echoes of the past.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to that particular organization, because I know that one of the things that I remember from our talk a few years ago when you invited me to speak at your Women in Brewing conversation at the Blue Ball Barn, that we've all kind of experienced a little bit of pushback as women as to why are you here? This is a man's area. Because it has been predominantly for so many years, but it is good to see that, more and more women are showing up as, no, we like beer too, because once you give me flavor, once you give me the essence and the story, then it's something that's amazing. Joe, we can help convert your wife. That's
absolutely
on it. We can do a milk stout. That'll give her her sweetness. I remember like Levante brewed an Oreo stout a few years ago, and I still dream of it. They poured a whole bunch of Oreo cookies into their mash. It was amazeballs.
Nice.
Joe also wants us to expand upon seasonal beers like autumn for lagers in Germany, heavier beers in cold weather, etc. I will preface that by saying that stouts and heavier beers should be available all the time because they're delicious. But that's my personal opinion.
What do you think?
Well, they certainly are in, if you go to the British Isles, right? But the seasonal beers were generally done around religious celebrations, as you might imagine, with Easter being a big celebration, Christmas being another celebration, Christian celebratory drinks, and that kind of carried over into the 19th century, with Bock beer being a renewal, the spring renewal, the rising, and all that, all of the things associated with Easter, and it was just really a celebration. It was a dark, heavy beer using all the ingredients that you could use, the toasted malts, and so that's kind of how that evolved. It was really around religious, festive celebrations.
I mean, gathering around with family and friends is a pretty good reason to drink for me. I know that's like, I don't brew for myself. I brew for the people I care about, and that's
and for special occasions.
Yeah,
times when.
Which reminds me, we need to rack the wine that we've got downstairs in the basement from last year.
Oh boy, yeah,
it's really well aged mead. Hooray! Do you guys have any other questions for us or for John? I know we're about at the wrap up point, and I certainly don't want to take up too much more of John's Friday evening, as much as I'm enjoying getting to see you for the first time, like during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it?
It has been way too long. I think the last time we were together, we were enjoying some drinks and food at Jessup's, followed by a Dew Point.
Yeah, absolutely.
John or Joe, that's a great start. Everyone's got to start somewhere. When I met Carly, she was just drinking Yingling. She considered that her craft beer of choice, and otherwise.
Hey now, what's the Innocent Gun? Innocent Gun was like my pinnacle, and that's still a very, very good beer. But that was all I had really experienced with craft beer.
That was one of the first craft beers. Actually, that is what got me into craft beer. I remember perusing the liquor store in Manitoba, and looking, because the American section was just like, I think it had Sam Adams and Flying Monkey, and that was it. Or Space Monkey or something weird. I don't know. It looked like somebody was on acid when they designed that beer. And they had Sam Adams, and I looked at the international section, which was much more interesting. And Innocent Gun was amazing. And then from that, the Canadian breweries, which I'm sadly don't import here, because like what's imported here is not what Canada has to offer. Like, we have such much more delicious beer.
Mass produced.
Not even like our biggest beer is Alexander Keith's, and that's not imported here. I want to put that back in my mouth. I enjoy that beer.
Well, Joe, have your wife try some porters. They're my personal favorite. They're nice, they're sweet, but they're not too rich.
If she likes the cinnamon and sugar, I mean, a pumpkin beer, a good nitro pumpkin beer is going to be creamy and delicious. So pumpkin is amazing.
Absolutely.
I mean, John knows his stuff. It's a really good beer.
Awesome.
I want that now.
Yeah.
They're making a whiskey out of that beer.
Oh, very good.
But you can pick it up at the free. I want it. I'm trying to hint that to my wife.
Hint taken.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we've taken up enough of John's time. He's been amazing. Thank you, John, so much for coming on again and helping us. And please do check out his websites, restoretheking.com, Delaware Beer History. You can find that online, also on Facebook. It's a really amazing Facebook group that he's always sharing really fun information, little snippets of beer history, which it always makes my day better when I see that, because it's just fun. Because history is not boring, and I love that John personifies that. So we're gonna thank you guys. We're gonna raise our glass to you for joining us tonight. Happy Folklore Friday and have a great weekend, everybody. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.